No refunds this weekend. That's it. Where's Michael? Where'd he go? That was the loveliest reading of How It Works I've ever heard. I swear to God, my sarcasm will show its ugly head this weekend, but that's not it. That was lovely. It's like my grandfather was reading me a bedtime story. Great grandfather maybe, I don't know. I think newcomers are going to tackle you in the break to take you through the steps. That was great. George, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for everybody who put some work into this thing. I'm a part of a retreat in Maryland called Step Brothers. Same deal. We have 70 guys. We have 2 knuckleheads come out and share for the weekend. We have the same exact dinger. Because I think my sponsor probably told you where to get that dinger, and we have the same energy. It's just a wonderful weekend. We ask everybody to turn their phones off and be present for each other. And whoever said it earlier, the idea of this weekend is to invite God and to accept that invitation. I can tell you that I'm no expert in Alcoholics Anonymous, as you'll quickly hear. But as my friend Joe says, I'm a really satisfied customer, and I hope I can convey that over the weekend. AA has given me an incredible life. Just a magical life. And I hope I can. We have a lot of sessions to cover, so if I can't cover it in those, I'll never cover it. But there was something else I wanted to say before we get started. Oh, we have our big announcement at Step Brothers is, now it didn't happen with him because he's a big guy, but the whole weekend you're not allowed to accost the dinger. By midday Saturday, everyone's kind of tired of the dinger, and so just don't put your hands on the dinger. But the other thing I wanted to ask, because you had mentioned it, how many guys are at their very first retreat ever? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. Great. All right. How many guys in their first 5 years of recovery? Okay. Awesome. Well, I honor the guys who are here for their first time. I hope they didn't tell you about the whole agenda with the nude yoga tomorrow afternoon, but it'll be okay. My first retreat, I was so nervous, and I was sober a long time. I'm going to bounce around a lot this weekend, but I'd been sober a long time, kind of made a mess of my life, and was trying to put the pieces back together. My sponsor puts on this little retreat. He said, hey, we got a spot, last minute, hop on a plane, get down here. And I'm like, okay. And get a little rental car, drive out in the couple hours in the woods of Tennessee. The banjos are playing and everything. And I've never been to a men's retreat. I'm sober a long time. I've been to some conferences, but never been to a men's retreat. And the guy that was leading it is this guy, Burns Brady. And the first thing he says is, first thing out of his mouth, I don't know anybody, there's only 30 of us there, so it's even more intimate than this. We're just all sitting around a circle, and the first thing he says is, I love men. And the sarcasm in me says, am I at the right retreat? And then he says, that's what my sarcasm does, it's my defense mechanism. And then he says, I have a deep need for intimate relationships with other men. And I had no sarcasm for that. And I hope that's what we can either begin this weekend or somehow cultivate. I have to have, what we have. My wife, at that retreat that I went to, she wasn't really happy that I went. You'll hear more about that later, but she wasn't really happy that I left her and the kids that weekend. And after going to a couple of them, we started Step Brothers 14, 13 years ago. And then she's an AA, long time, great woman. And the people in our home group got tired of hearing all the guys come back from Step Brother, floating on clouds and saying how great it was. And she came to me, she's like, what in the hell? She's like, you've been sober a long time, so why do you got to go to these men's retreats? And I said, honey, how, every now and again the truth will just hop out of your mouth by accident, you didn't even know you knew the truth. And I said, honey, you know how your girls come over and you go out on the porch for like an hour and a half and you cry it all out, and you put the pieces back together and you send them home? And she says, yeah. I says, well, it takes us 48 hours to do that, And she goes, and she got it. She's like, oh. She's like, I see that. And now, they, after all their times of giving us stuff for stepbrothers, they now have stepsisters that's actually in a couple weeks. So I love men's retreats. I love doing these things. I more love to be asked to do them than I love doing them. These things make me nervous. Most of them I've done with my sponsor, Scott, and he's 82 now, so I've graduated to, he gives me about 15 minutes out of every hour. I'm hoping Harold will get me to 16 or 17 minutes. We'll see. I am honored to be doing this with Harold. He's one of my favorite AAs. We've known each other a long time. He's certainly one of AA's best communicators, and honored to be sharing this weekend with him. I'm hoping this is more like he's the play-by-play, and I'll be the color commentator of the football game. But so how did I end up in a place like this? I wish I knew. I know the answer, and the answer is the God of my understanding. I spent the first 50 years of my life in Maryland. I now live in Nashville, Tennessee. I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C. There's a little well-to-do county called Montgomery County. Bethesda, Chevy Chase are very wealthy cities within that county right outside of Washington, D.C., Potomac. And my parents were lucky enough to buy a house out there before, it became really expensive. And, it was the 70s and the 80s, and it was keeping up with the Joneses. And my old man was an alcoholic, and his old man was an alcoholic. And I really believe I was born with this disease. Some guys, just drink their way into AA. Sooner or later, they pass out at the boardroom table and wind up here at 55, and that's not my story. I was an instant alcoholic from the very beginning. I was restless, irritable, and discontent, certainly long before I picked up. Being restless, irritable, and discontent doesn't make me an alcoholic. We all know that. You can call any state or government agency, the IRS, and try to get some help, and you'll hear others that are restless, irritable, and discontent that may not be alcoholic. But what makes me an alcoholic is when I drink 2 = 20. And if I say I'm going to stop, I somehow convince myself in very short order that was a mistake, that I kind of was overreacting a little bit. I remember very vividly, as a kid, I had some drinks. My parents would have these little cocktail parties. My dad owned a bunch of bars, and they'd have these cocktail parties. I don't know if they were cocktail parties, but that's what they called them. And back then, the only times you got cartoons was Saturday morning. There was a 2 or 3 hour morning for cartoons. That was it. There wasn't a cartoon channel, network, any of that stuff. And so, as kids, we'd go down there in the morning, Saturday morning, watch cartoons, and there'd be a whole lot of, half-drunk stuff and some beer cans, and we'd play the beer can roulette, shake it, see if it's got a cigarette in it, throw it back, oops, that was a mistake. That had a Marlboro, I think that was Marlboro Red, yeah, But that didn't, my drinking didn't take off from there. But and then in basketball, I was always in the basketball team because I'm tall. Unfortunately, I was really slow and I couldn't jump, but they used me as best they could. Stand there, put your hands up. And I remember being really slow going up and down the court. And in 4th or 5th grade, there was this kid, and I said, "Man, how'd you get so fast?" And he was fast naturally. I just wasn't built to be fast. And he said, I take these little 357 caffeine pills, and they make me really fast. So I started taking those. But that didn't turn into instant addiction or anything like that. But about a year later, I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and my oldest sister was getting married. And my mom's job for that wedding was to keep my father from ruining it. He was the town drunk. And little did she know that young Johnny was going to make his debut into alcoholism. My uncles thought it would be fun to get their young nephew drunk, and I thought it was a good idea too. And that night, my first attempt at getting drunk, I got out of my mind, blackout, blitz drunk, pissed myself, threw up all over myself, made a complete jerk of myself, did my best to ruin the event. I don't remember much about that because I blacked out the very first time. And but the next morning they had a breakfast. My uncle had some money and he had a membership at a country club. And we all went. There was about 16 of us, 20 of us at this table. And they got to talking about the night before and my behavior and what had happened the night before. My dad thought it was funny because he wasn't in trouble. My brother thought it was funny. The bride didn't think it was funny. But I had this old battle axe Aunt Martha. She came in on a broom, And I can still hear her voice. They were talking about how sick I was, and she said, "I bet he'll never, ever do that again." And I was thinking, oh no, I'm ready right now. Is that a Bloody Mary you're drinking? Right. I was ready because the magic happened. And, many people from the podium talk about the magic, you get 10 foot tall and bulletproof and better looking and better dancer. That wasn't the case for me. I just got to eventide, and that was good enough. The first long 12 years, my first 12 years of sobriety, from 0 to 12, were awful. I mean, I just knew deep down inside there was something wrong with me. Not only because everyone always asked me, what in the heck is wrong with you? But I was, Bill calls it anxious apartness. I didn't know what everybody else was doing. I was a day late, dollar short to figuring everything out. I just didn't, I didn't know that these other young teenagers had the same fears that I had of going through new situations, and they walked through them. I didn't know that. I just skipped them. I just didn't do it. And there was all kinds of madness going on at my home with my old man and his drinking. He had a liver transplant in the early 1980s, and it wasn't very fashionable like it is today. And there was a lot of turmoil in the home. I'm just going to leave it at that. But my friend, bus driver Mike, don't you love our AA names? Bus driver Mike, he really explains it best. He said, if you're an alcoholic, I know 95% of your story. And if you tell me you grew up in an alcoholic home, I know the other 5%. And I absorbed every bit of madness that happened in there. Every slammed cabinet, thrown dish, threat, every embarrassing, things that happens, growing up as a child of an alcoholic. I absorbed every bit of that, but I understood none of it. And there was no, this is the early 80s, like you didn't talk about that stuff. What I mean? It'd be a Sunday night, and my mom would lock my old man out, we'd be sitting there for a Sunday family dinner, and he'd be banging on the door to be let in, you MFers, I'm going to burn this house down, all the madness. My mom would say, keep eating your dinner, and like the next morning, there'd be no conversation about what happened. They'd be like, Cheerios or Captain Crunch? Nobody knew how to deal with any of that stuff. And again, that doesn't make me an alcoholic. My brother grew up in that home. He's not an alcoholic. My oldest sister, she's not an alcoholic. She grew up in the same home. The one that's closest to me, she probably could use us. And after that, the drinking just progresses as fast as it can for an 11 or 12-year-old. I was very fortunate. There was always alcohol in our home. I mean, always alcohol. And it was very convenient. I didn't have to go down to the beer store and give some wino an extra $5 to get a case of beer. There was just tons of hard alcohol at our home. Made me very popular for the weekend teenage parties. The problem with that was, though, I couldn't drink without throwing up. I did not have that off switch. I didn't have a moderation switch. And almost every time I blacked out, and that wasn't the plan. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to have a good time. I wanted that feeling of euphoria. But thankfully, a couple of years later, can I trouble somebody to grab me a water from the back? I'm fighting this cold. I'm gonna need a water, as you can tell. Thankfully, a couple of years later, a buddy of mine introduced me to some chemicals that would allow me to drink without going too far. And since this is not quite an AA meeting, I can just tell you, the very first time I got high, I remember when the magic happened. There was this little, what do you call it, like a wives' tale or urban myth that, the first time you smoke dope, you might not get high. Sometimes it doesn't happen the first time. I remember thinking, oh, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to get high. And he bought a big bag, and we sat, like all loser teenagers, we sat in the woods, and thank you, brother. We sat in the woods and smoked until our brains were rotten, eyes completely red, mouth as dry as a Sahara desert. Went home and ate 3 boxes of Crunch Berry cereal. And you got to be careful, that'll tear up the inside of your mouth. It's like styrofoam, right, brother? Especially with dry mouth, And I remember going upstairs, somehow making it to my bedroom without being confronted. My mom was like the typical Al-Anon, just head in the sand, like all she cared was that I'll leave that alone. We weren't confronted about a lot. And she was just done raising kids. I was the youngest of 4, as I told you. Plus she's taking care of this child as my father. I really got 5 kids and paying all the bills. So she was just trying to keep everybody alive and food on the table and the lights on. And God bless her, man. There's no criticism there. And but I remember I made it up to my bedroom. I remember sitting on the bed I laid back and stared at the ceiling, and I said to myself, this is like 12 or 13, I am going to spend the rest of my life like this. I do not care what the consequences are. And as silly as it may sound to be analogous, Bill talks about the alcoholic thinks his life is the only normal one. Like, I quickly figured out, like, you really don't have to go to school. Like, where I grew up in Montgomery County, this well-to-do area, they don't hold people back. They don't fail people, right? They don't want a failure on their record. That stuff gets reported to the county, right? That makes them look bad. Plus Nancy Reagan had this really popular recovery program. Everybody remember that? Just say no. Like, why would you say no? Like, I've already made the decision. This is my life forever. I don't care about my grades. I don't care. And I'm stealing everything I can, stealing money from my old man. Got caught stealing a lot of money from my old man. He owned these bars down in Washington, D.C., and he'd come home with these old canvas bags that had these zippers on them. And back in the day, you'd go to the bank, and they had a metal vault that would kind of roll out the side of the building, and you'd put the canvas bag in there with the deposit slip, and you'd shut it. But he couldn't do that because the bars were not in great neighborhoods, so he'd come home. So I quickly learned, I just take some money out of there when I need money. And, I remember justifying that by my hatred for him. I hated my old man. I hated my old man. With his alcoholism, my mom would come in and say, your dad's really sick, and the doctors say he might not live another 3 months or 6 months or whatever it was. And I remember thinking, okay, good, he'll be gone by Christmas, right? Like, I hated my old man. And so I started stealing money from these bags, and, you got to be careful, right? Like, there was $1,500 in these bags usually, which was a night's worth of business there. So you can't take out 400, right? That gets noticed. But you could probably get 40 or 60 out of there with it. And then, he'd probably think, I just counted wrong. I'd been drinking, 1580, 1520, whatever, But that wasn't enough. And so I know I can't take out $400 or $500 out of it. So I got an idea. I'll just take the whole bag, right? And he'll think, because he comes home drunk, he'll think he left it at the office or he left it in the car and somebody stole it. And some time goes by and I didn't get caught. And so what did I do? I did it again. And some more times went by and I didn't get caught. So I did it again. And finally, the third time I got caught, it was about $3,800 altogether. And in 1985, my parents' mortgage was $300 a month. That was a year's worth of mortgage. And I tell you that, so when I got caught the third time, was really the end of mine and my father's relationship. He said, I have to clothe you and I have to feed you because you're not of age, but you're dead to me. And I remember giving him the metaphorical middle finger, and saying, well, you've been dead to me for a long time, so we're good. And I just went off to the races. And since my little money stash ran out, I joined the Young Entrepreneur Club of marijuana sales. And I had visions. Remember back in the day, there was that show, Miami Vice, with Crockett and Tubbs chasing the drug dealers down in Miami. I thought I was going to be on that TV show. I was not. I was just a pathetic kid, really. And just got in a ton of trouble pretty quick. I'm burning every bridge I had. I can't make it through a day of school. I remember I had this, but they kept pushing me on. They put me in summer school and night school, and because in Montgomery County in the 1980s, if you were breathing, you went on to the next grade. And I remember this one time, though, this principal came to me and he said, listen, you have already exceeded the maximum unexcused absences in the state of Maryland. But if you can come the next 11 days, we'll pass you. Can you come? And I'm like, yeah, I'll be here. I promise. Because I don't want to go to night school. It sucks. I don't want to go to summer school. It sucks. And so I agreed to come, but 2 or 3 days later, somebody in the hall says, hey man, I got this bottle, or I got a bag. And I instantly changed my mind. I say to myself, you know what? Night school wasn't that bad. Summer school wasn't that bad. That cute girl was there. Maybe she'll be there this year. And I say, screw it. I was already living the one day at a time program. I'm burning every bridge I walk across. I walk into the house and my grandmother clutches her purse. You know what I mean? I'll steal from her and help her look for it. I'm just the scum of the earth, already at 14 years old, 15 years old, 16 years old, 17 years old. And I want to speed it up a little bit because we only have 8 more sessions. I had this really bad stretch of bad breaks and misunderstandings with the police department. In a 6 weeks period of time, I got arrested by the same cop with the same buddy in the same car on the same street with the drugs in the same spot, and walked away with 16 felonies. And it was so pathetic. It was so pathetic. I'm going to tell you how full flight from reality I was. We were driving around this 1970-something Datsun B210, and I was convinced that this cop had pulled us over because he was reverse racial profiling. He was black, and we were white, rich kids, and there was nothing rich about us, but we were in a rich area, and I was convinced that's why he pulled us over. I couldn't fathom that the reason why he pulled us over is we're in this, mustard yellow Datsun B210 from the early 70s. It had a green hood, it had a gray door, you could see through the floorboards. It had 40 Grateful Dead stickers on the back and smoke trailing out of both sides, and like the Cheech and Chong mobile. But that's not why he pulled us over. He pulled us over because we were white. And it was so pathetic. The last time, how they tap the metal flashlight on the window? On the passenger side, which I was, because I didn't have a driver's license, thank God. And he comes over and he taps the window, and I roll down the window like, surprised, like, oh, what can we do for you, officer? And he was like, he almost had empathy. He's like, what are you guys doing here? We just did this 2 weeks ago. And then we did it 2 or 3 weeks before that. Like, what in the hell is wrong with you? And I don't know, I don't know. And, but when I say 16 felonies, that makes you sound like really, badass, but they charge stack on you, you know what I mean? It's one event and they give you like 5 felonies for the same thing. Conspiracy to distribute, thinking of distribute, almost distributing tomorrow and distributing yesterday, and you got 5 felonies, But thank goodness I was a minor, and there was a couple of dollars that my godfather had put in a college account, and my parents knew I was never going to college, and so they got me this attorney, and they got conveniently, the charges were close enough together. They were able to get one court date for them, and this is like the winter of, let me back up a little bit. This is like the winter of 1988 into 89. And I had my first exposure to Alcoholics Anonymous. My Ebby showed up. I'm sitting in this class, computer class. There's about 20, 25 of us. And back then, the computers were not very exciting. Remember those computers? The green blinking squares? If you're anything close to the influence, like, that's not going to keep you awake. And but during the smoke break, back then you could smoke on school property. You could smoke anywhere back then. It was great. In the middle of the break, this guy, John G., comes up to me. I'd never talked to this cat, at least that I remember, never met him. And he said, hey, man, after this class, we're going down to the Rockville Metro Club. There's a 10:30 AA candlelight meeting. Do you want to go? I'm telling you, I'd never talked to this guy. I'm not sure whether it was my attitude or my aroma, but something, led him to believe that I might be a candidate, for the A&A class. I guess he just had a crazy sponsor that told him to work with new guys. I mean, he couldn't have been any more than 6 months older than I was. And I just had all these charges, and things weren't looking good. And I'm really good at being good enough for a little bit until the world stops paying attention to me, and then I go do what I want to do. It just seems to be a specialty of mine. As soon as the world stops giving me too much applause for mediocre performance, then I go do what I want. And so I wind up, I said, yeah, I'll go. And I call my mother from a payphone. I said, you're not going to believe this. Because the judge had, we didn't have the fancy GPS ankle monitors that we have today. They have those up here, right? The Irish bracelet. Some people call them the Irish Rolex. We didn't have those, so the judge released me to my mother, and I called my mother up, and I said, this guy wants me to go to an A&A meeting. And she said, please go, click. I was like, damn, what's your problem, And we went, and it was, as I said, it was an AA club. And I don't know about AA clubs in Wisconsin, but this AA club was wild. It was the best description I've ever heard. My wife gave to me. It was like the bar scene of Star Wars. Every walk of life was in this place. Bikers and bankers and hookers and lawyers, and Chewbacca was in the corner. It was a candlelight meeting too. So we got there like 10, 20, and it was about the size of this room, and the smoke was so thick, you didn't need to bring cigarettes. You could just go on in there, and they had a rotating disco ball, and they had a bunch of old metal coffee cans with candles in them, and the magic happened to me in that room, and that was, I didn't quit drinking there forever, but the magic that happened to me in there is that nobody wagged their finger at me, told me, man, you got to do this or you're going to wind up dead. You should do this. Why didn't you do that, right? The magic of Alcoholics Anonymous is we just share our experience, and you can't argue with experience. They just shared what they were like, what happened to them, which was the steps, and what their life was like now. And I couldn't argue with any of that. I could tell their lives were better, and I could tell they weren't full of it or what they used to be like, and I just kind of had to take their word about what happened to them, But I wasn't ready, and but I went home from that very first meeting, and it was late. And when I got home, my old man had put his big book and his 24-hour-a-day book on my bed. He had a year of forced sobriety because he had a liver transplant, and after his year, he thought, I can drink again, which makes complete sense to me. And he never went to AA after that. And but like I said, that wasn't my last drink, and things got worse, and I wound up in court, and this is March of 1989, and the judge says, listen, you're a couple months shy of being 18 years old. I'm going to give you 18 months, and you can do the first 6 months in the juvenile James Hickey Reformatory School. I'll never forget the name, and then transfer to an adult jail. Or the state of Maryland has opened the first, because they had already thrown me out of high school. He said the state of Maryland has opened the country's first recovery high school. And if you agree to go to this program for 6 months, I'll suspend your sentence. I mean, that's no brainer, right? I mean, 6 months, 18 months, even we can figure that out, right? And I agreed to go to this thing because it started months away. I would have agreed to be shipped to the moon, 2 or 3 months away. And I spent the next 3 or 4 months at home, just drunk every day. Nobody would come pick me up. Nobody would sell me anything. There's plenty of booze at my house. And I walked into that treatment center July 5th, 1989, without the desire to stay sober. And thanks to men like you, I haven't had a drink since. And I hear a lot of people talk about their early sobriety with great recollection. Oh, I was at my first meeting, and Steve the plumber said A, B, C, and D, and they relish those memories. And I get really jealous of that. I don't have any memories of my early recovery because I was not staying. Like, why register any of this stuff? As soon as my 6 months is up, I'm gone. And 16 months later, I left that 6-month program. I'm a little bit of a slow learner. I don't know if we got any slow learners in here. And thank God they kept me that long. The design of this program was you spend 6 months in it, and then they fix you and send you back to your high school, and you return into society. And I was sitting in the office when they called my high school, and they said, John's been here 6 months. He's doing great. He's 6 months clean. He's passed every drug test, every breathalyzer. We want him to go back to the school. And they said, he's not coming back. And so they decided to keep me until I got a diploma. And thank God they did. They saved my life. When I got out of that deal at 16 months sober, I had no life skills. They told us a lot about kind of their versions of the steps. They weren't big book, They did the best they could with what they had. I'm just going to leave it at that. But they did give us some information that really wasn't great. But what it did was because we would go to meetings at night and stuff, and it got me into the fellowship. It got me into the network of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was really lucky at that time in the Washington, D.C. and in Maryland area. There was loads of young people. I mean, we'd go to a young person's meeting. on a Wednesday night, there'd be 60 people and they're under 21 years old, maybe under 25 years old. It was fantastic. Now, I don't know if there's a lot of solid recovery going on, but there were some cute girls there. But there was a lot of it. I'm going to talk a little bit about my early recovery because I got the rest of the weekend to talk about the last 36 years. So they let me out of this program, and I'm just as restless, irritable, and discontent as the day I got in. I mean, my life's gotten better. I'm still on probation, but I haven't got arrested in 16 months. That's a world record for me. I haven't wrecked any cars. I haven't woke up next to some girl 3 times my size that looks like Shrek. Things are pretty good, and things are getting a little bit better at home, and I just can't, I can't seem to figure this deal out. A lot of young people start going back out, and then I had this road dog, man. We go to meetings every night together, and he went back out, and I'll never forget. It was Halloween night, 1990. He called me up, and he said, "Hey, man, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to go get high tonight. Do you want to go?" And I was so dumbfounded. I was so scared. I just said, "I'll call you right back." And I hung up, and I got in the car that my mom had given me, and I went over to my sponsor's house, and I was really shook up because he was my road dog, and what it shook me up was this knowledge of I'm next because I'm not doing anything different than this guy, And we did, and his name was Tommy, and we did some step work, but Tommy didn't know a lot about the steps, but I thought he did. And, my life is still a mess, man. I'm living at Mom's house, and they give me this car, but I can't keep it on the road. I can't do anything, I can't get a girl. I can't, nothing's right so it seems, Really, I got the world, by its, what. I'm in a perfect spot to take on young adulthood, but, inside, I'm just dying. I don't know how to live life. I don't have a drinking and drugging problem, man. I got a living sober problem. And in the treatment program, it was very easy to manage that. It was so, it was so hyper managed and had this forced sobriety. And so the first Gulf War had broke out. You guys remember that? And I had this is a microcosm of my early sobriety. I went to the recruiter. I come from a long line of military heroes. My grandfather was a 2-star admiral, 36 years in the Navy. His sons, my uncles, a couple of them went to the Naval Academy. One of them went to West Point, and I thought, what, I'm going to be a war hero. The war broke out, so I went to the recruiter, and I enlisted, and I went to my sponsor's house right after. I said, man, I got some good news. I enlisted. He said, "You what?" I said, "I enlisted. Isn't that great?" And I remember as clear as day, I can see his face. He said, "Did you tell him the truth?" I said, "Well, kind of." And which means no, I didn't tell them any truth. Lied on every question they had. And if you remember, that war was over in 7 days. They bombed the heck out of wherever it was, and it was over. So my vision of being a war hero was gone. And the reality was I didn't really want to be a war hero because I joined the Navy. If you remember, the Navy doesn't have much to do with the Desert War, but just a little clarification there. But, because, when you enlist, they don't ship you out for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months. And so it comes, I guess, to be March, and they time to go to MEPS, time to get shipped out, And in this 6 months, I started feeling a little bit better because I started doing a little bit of step work, and I got a girl that would pay attention to me, if you understand what I'm saying. And I don't know if I really want to go, And so, but anyways, they don't care if you really want to go, you're going. And so they go down to MEPS and they ship me out to San Diego and shave my head, and they send your stuff home right away, day one, and they march you for 48 hours. And then they bring 1,000 recruits into this one big auditorium. It's called the Moment of Truth Day. This is back before Google and internet and computers and stuff like that, because they can't check your background right away, And they say, there's 1,000 guys sitting Indian style. We haven't slept in 48 hours. And this officer comes, it might have been an NCO, comes storming in, making a hell of a racket. Wake up, you know how that looks like. He says, today is the moment of truth day. If you've lied to United States Navy, we will find out, and you will get a dishonorable discharge. It will stay with you like a bad venereal disease for the rest of your life. But if you're honest with us today, we'll give you a general discharge. No harm, no foul. So if you lied about being arrested, go into that corner. If you lied about psychiatric care, go into that corner. If you lied about drug use, go into that corner. If you lied about something else, go into that corner. And I'm in the middle of a room of 1,000 guys. Throw my hand up. This guy was so dumbfounded. I guarantee no one ever put their hand up at that moment. He was so dumbfounded, he called on me. He says, what is it, Smurf? They called us Smurfs because we had these old blue sweats. He says, what is it, Smurf? I said, where do you go if you lied about all four? He says, you come with me. And they marched me down to the commandant's office, court-martialed me within 2 hours, put me in the Navy brig for 14 days. So if the Russians invade, I'm not the guy. But, this is, if you see the microcosm of how that went, I went and I enlisted, and then I went and asked my sponsor if it was a good idea, right? Anybody, you sponsor anybody like that? I get those calls all the time, like, I'm not sure why we're talking about this now, brother, but we can, right? That cat's out of the bag. You left her already, whatever it may be. So they shipped me home, and I'm back at this AA club, just going to a lot of meetings, just BS jobs, just trying to just stumble through life. I got nothing. And at this AA club, there was this group of people, about 100 people there, and there was a group of 8 people that had this glow about them. And I didn't understand what that was about. They had the glow that you guys have. Their energy was like the energy of this group before we started. They looked each other in the eye. They embraced each other when they hugged. They told each other they loved each other all the time. They cried with each other. And at the end of every meeting, they would congregate and have this really in-depth conversation. And that was, are we going to Bob's Big Boy or are we going to Denny's? And I really wanted to go. I wish I could tell you because my spirit was connected to their glow. I guess it was. I just didn't want to go home. Because I'd go home to Mama's house and lay in bed and stare at the ceiling and just be reminded of what a loser I am and hold on to my forced sobriety. And so I went over where they were, kind of like where George was sitting. I pretended to straighten some chairs and clean some ashtray. Wanted them to see that I was doing some service, And I sent them telepathic messages to invite me. And they didn't. Oh, man. See that stink bug? And they didn't invite me. And so I walked out of that club and I slammed the door on my way out. Decided I was going to walk home, which was a bad idea. My mom's house was 7 or 8 miles away. And as I walked towards the end of the street where this AA club was, it was decision time. Because if I really was walking home, I had to go left. But everyone who was in cars typically went right. And so the last 200 yards, I slowed my roll to give everybody time to reconsider. And, it's all I had. And lo and behold, Charles stops. He's got Rick in the car. Charles was one of those guys with that glow. And Rick rolls down the window in his citation. And Charles was a man of very few words. He wasn't typically lovey-dovey. He was super old. He was like a dinosaur, dude. He was 50 when we met. And I just got my AARP invitation in the mail yesterday because my birthday is coming. And rolled down that window, and Charles said, hey, man, do you want to go to Bob's Big Boy with us? Well, now I'm a little pissed. But I'm not dumb enough to say no. But my ego is strong enough where it's not going to say, yes, man, I'm dying inside, please help me. So with my witty sarcasm, I say the first thing I can think of, and that's, man, I don't have any money. And he said, John, seeing that you're walking, your financial position really wasn't in question. Which in California, they translated that to, just get in the car. And I got in the car. It was a 2-seater. They folded the seat up, folded me up, put me in the back, and they took me to Bob's Big Boy or Denny's, whatever it was. And they were smart. They put me in the middle of the booth. And back then it was great. You could smoke in the booth. So we just ate pancakes and drank coffee and smoked cigarettes all night long. And we did that every night, for a long time. And, Charles became my sponsor for the next 10 years and took me on a journey through a very painful journey through the steps. Not painful because my story's certainly any worse than anybody else's, but painful in the pace that I took the steps. I mean, I was so begrudgingly slow going through the steps. And in short order, this woman started paying attention to me, and I'm getting old. I'm 20 years old, and I want to be a family man, and so I proposed to her. Seemed like, and then I went and asked Charles if that was a good idea, and we got married, and in short order we were divorced. She actually left on a Monday, and my wife Renee and I we went on our first date on a Wednesday, and this October we'll be married 30 years thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous. All thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous and to God. But I say all that to say that my early recovery was this incredible, rocky journey, and I suffered from this thing that I see a lot of young guys suffer from, right? Like, it seems nearly impossible. I've worked with a lot of young guys. I try to anyways, and it seems nearly impossible to convince a guy under 25, it's a broad statement, under 25, that what you really need is a spiritual awakening. You're in the treatment center, in the rehab, working with these guys, and they got that newcomer plan. They're like, man, I had the plan right. As soon as I get out of here, I need to get off of paper. I need to get my driver's license squared away. The holy trinity of alcoholic: the driver's license, the plates, and the insurance that match. If I just get those three, because if I can get, it's the if only world, right? I mean, the first 5 years of my sobriety is, if only I could get down here, I'll be okay. Probably even longer than that. If I could just get over there, I'll be okay. If I could get over there, I'll be okay. And let me just get off the paper. If I get that better job, I get my own place. If I get my own place, then I can get her. That's a big deal. And it just was impossible to tell me that. I think a lot of that is just being young, and I used to really beat myself up about that for not getting it faster. I love a lot of us in recovery, like Richard Rohr, and I love a lot of his writings. And he talks about these two halves of life. That the first half is, we're building this container that we're going to live in for the rest of our life, and then we see that kind of fails us, right? And that might be, getting a rank in the military, or getting the right degree, or the right status in the job, or the right physique, or the right whatever, make our life look a certain way so we can be happy, and then that fails us, and then the second half of life we spend working on what we're going to put inside that container. And that was a big, long lesson for me. I certainly didn't learn that after 5 years. I'll share more about that or as the weekend goes on. But those old guys saved my life, man. When I walked in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was not a high-value draft pick. You know what I'm saying? Like the guys weren't knocking over each other. Oh, I get to sponsor John. No, I get to sponsor him this time. Because I would come in late. I'd come in late 5 minutes early. And back then we had halftime in our meetings because they finally outlawed smoking. And so we'd all go outside and smoke a cigarette, and we'd come back. But I'd come in late from the halftime, and then I'd leave early, and I'm eating all the cookies, drinking all the coffee. I'm not doing any service. I'm hitting on all the girls. I mean, I'm a menace to Alcoholics Anonymous. But every single time I reached out the hand of Alcoholics Anonymous was there. Nobody ever said to me, John, you've cried wolf enough. We are not going to help you this time. Never. And those old guys just saved my life, man. And Charles was my sponsor for about 10 years and just recently died. In the last few minutes I want to share with you. My sponsor's on the back of that chair, I think. Scott, a lot of you guys know Scott. He does this love meditation. Anybody familiar with love meditation? In this meditation, he talks about this, kind of envisioning this beam of God coming from him and sending it to others. And I like to use the analogy of an umbilical cord. I think I've got this umbilical cord from me to God. I think it was Chuck Chamberlain that said, I could never really be separated from God. I can feel like I'm separated. I can act so terribly that I feel like I am, but I can never really be separated. And I just believe that to be true. And so when he does that meditation, I like to envision this the love coming to me from this umbilical cord. And when my wife, my now wife, my favorite wife, my last wife, great woman, you'll hear a lot about her this weekend. When she was having our second child, so as I told you, we hooked up right away and just fell in love, and our sponsors were married, and our sponsors and our therapists, we were going to therapy at the same time, and they were like, just keep AA first and the rest will work out. And we did, just keep AA your priority and it'll be okay. And we did. And anyway, she was having our second child, and she's in the delivery room. And you guys know what that looks like, right? You got like 10 stickers on the stomach, going up to a monitor, monitoring the baby's heartbeat. And so we're in there. This is my first time in childbirth. This is her second child. She had a child from a previous marriage that I've since adopted. That's my daughter. Never met her father. And but we're in there. So this is my first time in childbirth. And all of a sudden, the monitor goes, beep. I'm not a doctor, but I know that's not good news. All these doctors come rushing in. The nurses come rushing in. Baby's heartbeat has stopped. Doctor's like, get a C-section kit. They roll in this thing, and they like push me out of the way. I'm like, oh my God, what's happening in here? The doctor's getting ready to like cut her open with a chainsaw. And this old school delivery nurse comes in, and she ass checks the doctor. She says, hold on, doc. This would never happen in today's medicine. She says, hold on, doc. She says, come here, baby. Roll over on all fours. And she did. She said, put your arm way out here and put your leg way out there. And she did. And all of a sudden, beep, 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 the baby's heartbeat came back. And about an hour later, the baby's born. Beautiful, beautiful child. One of the great loves of my life. Talk to her every day. And the next day, before they discharge us, I find this nurse. And I said, what in the hell happened in there? She says, oh, that's a no-brainer. She says, sometimes what happens is, right before the baby comes out, they get so scared, they squeeze their own umbilical cord so hard that they stop their own heartbeat. And that is exactly what I do with my life. And that is exactly why I'm here this weekend. That is exactly why I sponsor men, and I still have a sponsor with 36 years of sobriety. That's why I'm still in the prison. That's why I still have the worst job in my home group. It's the only job they'll give me. It's why I still stay connected to Alcoholics Anonymous, because in no time at all I can find myself squeezing that umbilical cord. I have to have intimate relationships with other men that look at me and say, John, you're squeezing. You're squeezing your own umbilical cord. And so, one magical step at a time. I wish we had 12 fingers. It would be a better analogy. But, each finger for a different step of releasing this umbilical cord. And Alcoholics Anonymous has given me the most incredible life that there are many great descriptions of what we talk about. We share our experience, strength, and hope. And I love the description. I think it's on page 29. It says, each person in the personal stories describes how they established their relationship with God. And I hope over this weekend that's what I'm able to convey. Certainly, if you gave me 800 hours, I would not be able to convey what this relationship with God and my understanding really looks like. I don't think any of us has that ability. But I can certainly convey to you the effects that it's had on my life. AA has given me the most magical life, just doing it really poorly. So I'm excited to really share my life with you guys this weekend, and that's what we hope to do right there. Harold and I are not experts. As I said earlier, we're just satisfied customers, man. And I hope to, what happened, the magic of these weekends does not come from this podium or from Harold or I this weekend. I mean, Harold's going to say some great stuff, I know. But the magic of what happens is at that coffee pot back there. It's the walk down the hall. It's during the break when some guy says, man, I need to talk to you, brother. And sometimes it takes us all weekend to get there. That's the magic of this weekend. And so we just get to be referees, and we're grateful to be here with you. I love AA. I love you guys. Thanks.